President Trump recently suggested an attack on Nigeria. Shocking events are happening everywhere. Let's examine why President Trump said this and if it's realistic. On October 31st, President Trump wrote on his Truth Social that Christianity in Nigeria is facing an existential threat. He also said thousands of Christians are being killed by extremist Islam and that the United States is ready and able to protect Christians worldwide. On November 1st, Donald Trump mentioned the attacks in Nigeria in another Truth Social post. He warned that if the Nigerian government allows continued massacres of Christians, the United States will cut off aid and may intervene militarily to stop the armed groups responsible. He said he would direct the Department of Defense to prepare possible actions. Pete Hegseth, Secretary of Defense, said the Department of Defense is preparing to act and will kill armed groups committing atrocities if Nigeria doesn't protect Christians. Conflicts between Muslim nomads and Christian farmers have persisted in Nigeria for a long time. Muslim believers mainly live in the north, while Christians are concentrated in the south. The two religions have split Nigeria's religious landscape, and the conflict is intensifying. Nigeria's religious breakdown: Islam 53.5%, Christianity 45.9%, Voodoo 0.6%. Christianity and Islam are exactly divided. Boko Haram, an Islamic extremist group formed in 2002, is a major source of instability due to its violent acts. This Islamic extremist militant group has indiscriminately attacked civilians, claiming to establish a caliphate in the northern region and execute Christians. In fact, the name Boko Haram itself means Western education is forbidden. Clashes between Boko Haram and Nigerian religious forces continue, with over 40,000 deaths in 16 years of conflict. It is also true that as extremist Islamic forces gain power, many civilians are being massacred. Of course, what's interesting is that most of the deaths from this conflict have occurred mainly in the northern regions where Boko Haram is based, so there are actually more Muslim victims than Christians. In 2025, Nigeria had 1,923 civilian attacks, with only 50 targeting Christianity for religious reasons. President Trump may have announced plans to attack Nigeria due to Boko Haram or other armed groups. The United States government evaluates the level of religious freedom in each country every year and designates countries that seriously violate or tolerate violations of religious freedom as countries of particular concern. The most recent designation was made in December 2023. China, Iran, North Korea, and Russia were 4 of 12 countries of particular concern. President Trump newly designated Nigeria as a country of particular concern. This time, President Trump also asked Representative Laili Mua, who has been urging the designation of Nigeria as a country of particular concern, and House Appropriations Chairman Tom Cole to investigate this issue and report back. Probably the United States will continue to put pressure on Nigeria in the future. Of course, the possibility of an actual military attack is low. However, there is a good chance that the United States could carry out airstrikes against armed groups or conduct offensive operations in specific areas with the cooperation of the Nigerian government. If Nigeria does not comply with the demands of the United States could use a much stronger card: economic pressure. A key example is the aid budget. Nigeria depends on United States aid for about 21% of its reconstruction budget. This means the United States can directly affect Nigeria's main public services if it chooses. So it's not easy for Nigeria to refuse the demands of the United States. So on the surface, they strongly protest, saying it's a violation of sovereignty and interference in internal affairs, but in reality, behind the scenes, they are accommodating the wishes of the United States. President Bola Tinubu of Nigeria also spoke to Reuters, stated in an interview that any delay is acceptable as long as the United States supports preserving our territory. In other words, while they officially express opposition, in reality, they are showing a double-sided attitude by yielding to the United States' willingness to cooperate. Most analysts believe President Trump is tough on Nigeria due to China's economic interests in Africa. China has invested at least $20 billion or $29 trillion in major infrastructure like railways, roads, and ports in Nigeria. China is extensively carrying out its Belt and Road Initiative projects in Nigeria. The Chinese government provides the capital, and Chinese companies are in charge of the construction, effectively trying to turn Nigeria into an economic colony of China. By 2025, 2 Chinese-funded lithium processing plants will be fully operational. China and Nigeria are boosting military cooperation. In May 2025, they agreed to expand ammunition production in Nigeria and train defense specialists. China's influence in Africa is rising, and the United States needed to stop it. Nigeria's Christians cited possible military intervention to justify their visit to Japan. Meanwhile, the Ukraine war continues. They're planning to invade Venezuela soon, so attacking Nigeria too might be too much. They also withdrew their troops from Niger, which borders Nigeria, last year. The German newspaper Die Welt assessed that President Trump's threats are symbolic and political in nature, and that he lacks the will to actually take military action. If an attack happens, it will likely be coordinated with the Nigerian government and target only Islamic extremist groups with precise airstrikes. It would also be good to look at why China is investing in Africa. China is not simply investing in Nigeria. On the surface, China appears to be a development partner building railways, ports, and roads, but behind the scenes, there are much more calculated motives at play. 86% of Nigeria's government debt comes from Chinese state-owned banks, mainly the Export-Import Bank of China and China Development Bank. The problem is that this money is structured in a way that makes it difficult to repay. If repayment is delayed or impossible, China secures ports, airports, and mine roofs as stated in the contract. This is a typical pattern of so-called debt trap diplomacy. This structure has already been confirmed in other countries as well. China builds infrastructure, takes assets as collateral, and uses them to expand its political influence. That trend is also evident in Nigeria. If this continues, Nigeria will become economically dependent on China, with Chinese companies controlling major infrastructure. More importantly, this isn't just about money. China is expanding its political influence through this dominance. China signed agreements with Nigeria's Ministry of Defense to provide equipment maintenance, ammunition production, and technical support. Economic cooperation is spreading to security cooperation, and China's economic colonial strategy is moving toward completion. In other words, they lend money, secure assets as collateral, and even take control of security through technology and equipment. Nigeria may initially benefit from new infrastructure, but rising foreign debt later makes it hard to set economic policies without China's approval. The United States won't just watch this happen. If the United States lets Nigeria, Africa's largest oil producer with 200 million people, fall under China's influence, it would be a strategic mistake. If Nigeria aligns with China, China will secure West Africa's raw materials, military bases, and political influence. This is ultimately why President Trump made such strong remarks. On the surface, it's under the pretext of protecting Christians, but in reality, it's a geopolitical response to prevent the spread of China's economic dominance. In fact, another reason the United States is pressuring Nigeria is because of its internal political structure. Nigeria's ruling party under President Bola Tinubu faces strong public dissatisfaction over corruption scandals and economic troubles. Inflation has risen above 20%, and youth unemployment is near 20%, fueling protests and anti-government sentiment. The Trump administration is using the chaos as diplomatic leverage. Politically unstable countries are more likely to give in to outside pressure. The United States continues to pressure this unstable Nigerian regime, and it seems that there's a strategy hidden within to reorganize the system into a pro-American government. This isn't the first time the United States has used this approach. Regimes like Libya's Gaddafi, Sudan's Omar al-Bashir, and Somalia's Mohammed Siad Barre faced United States intervention over human rights and counterterrorism, ultimately collapsing. President Trump is repeating the same logic. The United States uses claims of Christian persecution in Nigeria as a pretext to sway public opinion, undermine the regime's legitimacy, and promote pro-American political groups through the opposition or military. Or they could directly pressure the ruling power to reorganize it. The goal of this strategy is to create a regime that is friendly to the United States. The United States can't risk losing influence over Nigeria, as it's a key nation shaping all of West Africa. If Nigeria were to completely side with China, the United States would lose its foothold in West Africa. So, President Trump's strong remarks can be interpreted as an attempt by the United States to regain leadership by taking advantage of Nigeria's political instability. Currently, President Trump is making strong statements. What do you think about the current situation? Please share your thoughts in the comments as well. That's all for this video. Thank you.